Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, we're venturing into the darkest corners of America's wilderness, places where the trail ends, the road bends, and the night swallows every sound. I'll be sharing a collection of true encounters and chilling legends from remote mountains, shadowed forests, and lonely backroads across the country. These aren't campfire myths. These are real experiences that linger long after the sun goes down. So grab a blanket, kill the lights, and settle in for a journey where beauty meets terror. Don't forget to subscribe, drop a like, and share your own eerie stories in the comments. Now, let's begin. Story 1. The door that locked from outside. They sent me up to Green Hollow after the last snow melted sometime early March. The roads were still a patchwork of frozen dirt and thawed mud, and the Forestry Commission needed assessments on a handful of old properties slated for demolition. Most were just collapsing shacks, long given back to moss and kudzu. This one, though, sat at the far end of a washed-out mining road no one had used in decades. It wasn't even on any current map. I found it by accident. I'd taken a wrong turn, following tire ruts that just sorta stopped. From there, it was nothing but silence and soft pine needles underfoot. The house sat at the edge of a clearing, where the tree line bent around it like it was hiding something. 2 stories, grey siding mostly intact, a porch that slouched a little to the left. I remember thinking it looked preserved, too clean for how deep in the woods it sat. No graffiti, no broken windows, just quiet. I stepped up onto the porch, which moaned under my weight but didn't give. The front door was ajar. I called out like I always do, just in case squatters or wildlife had taken up residence. No answer, not even an echo. Just the dry wheeze of wind slipping between boards. Inside, the air smelled old but not rotten. The kind of stale you only get when things have been closed off for too long. Furniture was still in place, a sofa draped in yellowing sheets. A dining table with plates set for 3, crusted over with mold and mouse droppings. Someone had left a half-finished puzzle on a side table. A little ceramic bowl sat next to it with jelly beans, now fossilized. What stuck with me most was the order. It hadn't been ransacked, no signs of looters. Everything looked like whoever lived here had just walked out one day and never came back. I took my pictures, measured some structural beams. I remember scribbling in my notebook, roofline stable, minor foundation shift. I didn't hear the door close, not really, just a dull thunk that echoed down the hallway while I was checking under the stairs. When I got back to the entryway, the door was shut. I tried to open it. Nothing. I jiggled the knob, turned it hard, even kicked it once. Still nothing. Then I noticed the bolt. It was on the outside. I'm telling you, I didn't miss that walk in. There's no way I didn't see a bolt on the outside of the door. I stood there staring at it through the little crack between the door and the frame, watching a sliver of fading daylight and trying not to let my nerves show. I told myself, it was wind, or the frame warped with the cold, something explainable. That's what I do when I feel panic rising. I reason with it. I went back inside, found the kitchen, looked for a back door. There wasn't one, just a window that hadn't been opened in what looked like half a century. Its latch crusted with layers of old paint. Upstairs, I found 2 bedrooms and a small hallway closet. One of the bedrooms was clearly a child's. Pink wallpaper curling at the corners, a faded mobile still dangling over the bed, twirling without wind. The floor creaked under every step. Then I saw the claw marks. They were along the wall near the closet. Tiny, too small for an adult, but high up, far too high. 4 sets in a pattern, like something had been dragged or climbed. I ran my fingers along them. Splinters flaked off like the marks were fresh, though everything else in the room was caked in decades of dust. At the end of the hall was the attic door, just slightly ajar. I should have left it alone. I really should have. But something drew me to it. Not curiosity, not exactly. It felt personal, like I was being dared or tested. The pull cord swung gently as I reached for it. The second I grabbed it, I swear I heard a whisper, not a word. Just the sound of breath, close and low, like someone exhaling right into my ear. I froze, rope in hand. Waited, silence again, just the old house groaning with its own memory. I tugged. The ladder creaked down, each rung brittle and soft. I climbed carefully. The attic was small, barely tall enough to stand. Just a few boxes and a rocking horse, handmade, paint-chipped, one glass eye missing. It sat in the center of the room, and it was spinning, slowly, methodically, around and around on its little curved legs. I watched it for a long time, waiting for it to stop, but it didn't. That's when I noticed the floorboards, gaps wide enough to peer through. I knelt and looked. There were holes under the floor, tiny crawl spaces, no more than a foot deep. Someone had gouged symbols into the wood, repeating shapes that looked like stick figures missing their heads, over and over again. I heard the whisper again, this time from below, not angry, just tired, ragged. I backed away, made it down the ladder, stumbled down the stairs. I tried the door again, still locked. Bolt is still unmoved. I started to shout then, not screaming, not yet, just calling out, anyone, anything. Nothing answered. That night was long, longer than it should have been. I sat against the door, listening. The floor creaked above me at random intervals. Once I heard what sounded like a toy being dragged, slow, across hardwood. I stopped breathing every time it moved. At one point, I fell asleep, not sure how. When I woke up, it was still dark. My watch had stopped. My phone was dead. Morning came without sunlight, just a grey haze that filtered through the dusty windows. I stood and tried the door again. It opened, easily. The bolt was rusted solid, like it hadn't been moved in years. I stumbled outside, not even grabbing my notebook. My truck was right where I'd left it, but the tracks were gone, like no one had been there in a decade. When I told my supervisor, he said I'd gotten turned around, that I must have broken into the wrong house. But I know where I was. I showed him the photos I'd taken, interior shots, the toy horse, the puzzle, even the door with the bolt, all corrupted, just grey static, except one, a picture of the attic floor, taken from above. In the far right corner, crouched low beside the rocking horse, was a shape, knees tucked to its chest, eyes wide, too wide. It looked like a child, but there was no face. I deleted it. I don't know why, it just felt wrong having it on my phone. Like it could still see me. I haven't been back to that part of Green Hollow since. And I won't. Some places weren't forgotten. They were sealed. And I think that house, it remembers who tries to leave. Story 2. The Woman in the Basement Mirror. After my uncle went missing, nobody in the family seemed eager to deal with his cabin. It sat off a rutted fire road in Clay County, buried so far in the woods that even the sheriff said he probably wandered too far and got turned around. They never found a body, just his boot prints leading into the laurel thickets, and nothing after that. He was my mom's brother, and I'd always liked him more than the rest of the family. A quiet man, lived simple. Wood stove, canned food, battery radio. He kept a hand-drawn map of the land in a drawer and always said the woods were old in a way people didn't like to admit. I figured I'd spend a week out there, settle his affairs, pack up his things, and maybe see if the place was worth holding on to. The cabin was small, 2 rooms and a loft, all made of thick pine boards darkened with time. It sat at the edge of a steep ridge, one side clinging to the slope, like it was afraid of sliding down. When I stepped inside, the air hit me with that heavy silence only old places have. Not emptiness, not quiet, just the absence of movement, like the cabin itself had been holding its breath since the last person walked out. His boots were still by the door. There was a fire already laid in the hearth, fresh enough the wood hadn't grayed. That should have bothered me more than it did, but I just figured someone from the sheriff's office had done it on their last sweep. I made coffee, unpacked a duffel, and sat at his table, flipping through a weathered notebook filled with penciled entries. Hunting logs mostly, animal sightings. One entry caught my eye from the week he disappeared. Something moved under the floor last night. Not mice. Breathing. The rest of the page was scribbled out hard, almost dug into the paper. I didn't find the basement until my third day there. Wasn't marked on his map. I was walking through the front room when the floor gave way beneath me. No warning, just a soft crunch and a collapse. I crashed down into darkness, splintered boards falling around me like dry leaves. When I landed, it wasn't far, maybe 6 feet, but the air was so thick and still it felt deeper, like I'd dropped into something buried. I stood slowly, brushing off dirt and plaster. My flashlight flickered once, then steadied. The space was cramped. Stone walls, old beams, damp ground. There were shelves covered in jars of cloudy water and a few busted wooden chairs stacked in a corner. The worst part was the mirror. It leaned against the far wall, full length, framed in rusting brass. The glass was cracked at the top right, like someone had thrown something at it. I walked toward it, the flashlight beam shaking more than I'd like to admit. At first glance, I didn't see anything wrong. My own face stared back, dusty and pale. But when I raised my hand to wipe my mouth, the reflection lagged. Not a glitch, a delay. It blinked too slowly. Its chest rose at the wrong time, like it was trying to match me but couldn't quite get it right. And the eyes, God, the eyes. They were mine, but drained, as if whoever was behind them hadn't slept in years. Or maybe they didn't blink because they didn't need to. I took a step back. So did it. But then it smiled. I didn't. I turned and scrambled for the hole above me, pulling myself back into the cabin like something was chasing me, though I never heard a sound behind me, just the echo of my own panicked breathing. I should have boarded the hole up right then, or driven back into town, but I didn't. I sat outside on the porch for hours trying to convince myself the fall had rattled my brain. That night, I slept on the couch. I couldn't bring myself to climb the loft ladder with that hole gaping in the floor like a mouth. Around 3 a.m., I woke up with this sense that something was off, like when the power goes out and the silence feels too still. I stood up and walked to the hallway between the two rooms, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. The mirror was there, in the hallway. I don't know how. I hadn't touched it. No one else had been there. And yet, it leaned against the wall like it belonged, like it had always been there. The crack was still in the corner, the brass frame still flaked with rust. I stared into it again. This time, the reflection matched me. First, then, as I turned my head slightly, I saw her, standing just behind me, close enough that I should have felt breath on my neck. A woman, thin, hair long and tangled, eyes wide with something between terror and hunger. I spun around. Nothing. I looked back. She was still there, just watching, like she'd been waiting to be seen. Like she'd been watching long before I ever found the basement. I don't remember going outside. I just know I ended up in my truck, parked at the edge of the clearing, shivering. The dome light flickered once and died. I locked the doors and stared at the cabin until sunrise, half expecting to see her watching from a window, but the windows stayed dark. The next day I nailed a blanket over the hallway where the mirror had been. I didn't look under it again. I kept my boots on, packed my bag, and decided to sleep in the truck from then on. That afternoon I tried to call my mom, but the reception was gone, nothing but static. I stayed one more night, telling myself I just needed rest before the drive back. I kept the engine running, slept in shifts. At one point, early morning, just before dawn, I looked up and saw her again. Not in the mirror, in the tree line, standing where the shadows were still thick. Her face was pale, mouth parted like she was mouthing something, but her eyes weren't looking at me, they were aimed at the cabin. I left an hour later. Didn't take anything with me, didn't lock the door. I just drove until the road turned to gravel, then asphalt, then town. I didn't stop. They called me 2 weeks later. My cousin had gone to the cabin to pick up the rest of Uncle Dean's things, said the place was empty, said there was no mirror in the hallway or the basement, said there was no basement at all, just floorboards, intact. I didn't argue, didn't tell them I still wake up to the sound of glass shifting, that sometimes, in the reflection of windows or puddles or dark TV screens, I catch a delay, a flicker, a face behind mine, and sometimes she still smiles. Story 3. The House with the Humming Walls. I was helping a buddy clear an old logging road near his family's property, middle of nowhere, between two hills that looked identical no matter which way you turned. One of those roads that hadn't seen a truck in years. The trail was barely there under the moss and pine needles, more suggestion than path. A big poplar had come down in the last storm, splitting across the trail like a felled crossbeam. I had the chainsaw, he had the wedge and sledge. About halfway through cutting it up, I stepped off the trail to take a leak, and that's when I saw it. At first it just looked like a break in the tree line, too square, a frame roof, almost swallowed by vines and dog hobble, sitting quiet on a slope about 40 yards off the trail. The chimney was half crumbled, like it had been punched out from the inside. I couldn't see the door, only the edge of a single upstairs window, dark and too low to the roof. I should have called out to my buddy. But something about the place made me stay quiet, like I was afraid the house would hear me. I walked a slow circle around it. Boards grayed and warping, porch sunken in, shingles slipped like missing teeth. It should have just felt old, but it didn't. The air around it was thick, not just humid but heavy, dense like breath in a closed room. I was standing near the back wall when I noticed it. The wood was humming, not loud, not even rhythmic, just this subtle vibration in the siding, like something was moving behind it, not scuttling, not scratching, breathing. I pressed my ear to the wall. I know how it sounds, but I swear to you, I heard music. Not a full song, just 5 notes, slow and sweet, like a lullaby played underwater, high-pitched and distant, like it was coming through miles of tunnel. I stepped back, looked up at the roofline. No wires, no solar panels, no reason for any sound, especially that sound, to be coming from inside. So I went in. The door wasn't locked. It gave off a sound like wet rope being pulled through a pipe. The air inside was colder than it should have been. Not just cool from shade, cold like cellars, cold like places that forget sunlight. And the smell, old wood, dust, and something else I still can't name. Not rot, not mildew, something faintly sweet, but not in a good way. The music got louder as I stepped inside, still the same 5 notes, repeating. I passed through a narrow hall into what must have been a living room once, long abandoned, floor sagging, walls stained with old water lines. I shined my flashlight around and stopped. Mattresses, 3 of them, dirty and pale, nailed flat to the floor like someone wanted to make sure they didn't move. No sheets, no pillows, just nails, rusted and driven deep, and near the corner, a closet door. On the inside of it, a thick iron chain bolted to the frame, ending in a cuff. Not a lock. Just a loop of rusted metal the size of a child's wrist. The music was louder here. I looked up. There was a speaker jammed into the ceiling above the closet. One of those old circular intercom types, half covered in dust and lint. The notes were still playing over and over. A lullaby looped until the edges blurred. I backed up toward the hallway. My breath felt heavy, like I was breathing through a cloth. That's when I noticed the wallpaper. I hadn't seen it coming in. Tiny shapes repeated in a grid. Drawings of children holding hands, smiling, black-eyed, mouthless, all facing inward toward a central figure that had been scratched out in every panel. Not just faded, scratched out. Like someone took time, painstaking, careful time, to remove whatever that middle thing used to be. I left. I didn't run. I couldn't. It felt like the house was watching how I moved. Judging me, I stepped back onto the porch, turned once to look over my shoulder. The music stopped. Dead silent. Not a gradual fade, just off. Like it knew I was leaving. Back on the trail, my buddy was still working the tree. I didn't say anything. I just helped finish the cut, and we got out of there before dusk. On the ride back, he asked why I looked sick. I said nothing. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. The song kept playing in my head. I hadn't memorized it. I didn't want to, but it was there anyway. 5 notes, repeating, not quite right, like it was designed to stick. I turned on the TV, then music, then white noise. Nothing helped. I kept seeing that closet in my head, that chain. The next morning, I drove back to the county records office, trying to track down the parcel. The clerk said that stretch of land hadn't been assigned a dwelling in over 40 years. Show me the aerials, no building, just trees. He let me look through an older file drawer though, and I found something, a report. 1982. One sentence from a sheriff's note burned into my memory. We heard music, but no power lines run that far. We didn't go in. I asked him if he remembered anything else. He just looked at me and said, "We don't keep maps for places like that. Let it be. I've tried. I don't go near that trail anymore. I don't go near music boxes either. But sometimes when the house is really quiet and I'm in that place between sleep and waking, I swear I feel my walls start to hum. Not loud. Just enough to feel it in my ribs. And if I hold still, really still, I can almost hear the song again. And sometimes I hear breathing behind it." Story 4. The Man Who Lived in the Walls. I was doing contract work for the county last fall, mapping condemned properties before winter hit, mostly with drone footage and quick interior scans. Easy work if you didn't mind being alone in old houses long enough to hear them breathe. They assigned me to a forgotten Cole family estate out past Elkhorn Gap. No road signs led to it anymore, just a gravel cut that narrowed into woods until you couldn't tell if you were driving forward or back. The house was perched on a slope, sagging on one side, windows black and blank like dead eyes. On paper, it was listed as condemned since '91. One of the last families that stayed behind after the coal dried up. The kind of place people stopped talking about even before they left. I parked my truck just past the rusted gate, tires crunching through frost. The air smelled faintly of creosote and ash and something colder underneath. Not rot, more like long unopened cellars and old coats. I launched the drone first, watched it hover above the roofline. From the sky, the house looked sunken, not just from weather, but like the land had tried to swallow it and failed. Inside was worse. The floor groaned under every step, but the place didn't collapse. Just creaked like it had been waiting for company. I started with the living room, plaster peeled in sheets, fireplace full of feathers. I stepped through each room, noting the decay. But what I kept noticing, again and again, were shoes. Old boots, worn smooth, not scattered, not left behind, always placed carefully near the corners, always pointed toward the walls. In the upstairs hallway, there were 3 sets lined end to end, like someone had been pacing the length of the hall and never left. I squatted to get a better shot, and that's when I noticed one of them was damp. The toe was smeared with fresh dust, like it had moved that morning. The laces were tied, tight, purposeful. I heard something then, soft. A shuffle from the far room. I called out, "County contractor, is there anyone here?" But my voice felt smothered by the wallpaper. I pressed forward, stepping slow. The room was empty, floorboards warped, closet doors open, but in the corner, just behind a torn curtain, I saw something white, a face, pressed up against the window from the outside, not looking in, looking sideways, at me. His skin was grey pale, the kind that doesn't see the sun. His eyes were open wide, but unfocused. Like staring wasn't something he needed to do to see. His nose was flattened against the glass. I blinked, and he was gone. No footsteps, no sound, just gone. I ran down the stairs, stepped outside, and circled the house. No footprints in the frost, no signs anyone had been there. I went home and checked the drone footage. Most of it was fine, roof angles, rot patterns, the works. But near the end, when I'd sent it low to skim the second floor windows, I saw it, frame by frame. That same face. A man standing so close to the glass it looked like he'd grown out of it. His nose crushed flat, his lips barely parted like he was mid-whisper. He wasn't behind the glass. He was the glass. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, I called the county office, told them something was off about the place. They brushed me off, said if I felt unsafe, I could request an escort. I drove out there again, this time with Sheriff Landers, a man who'd worked these hills long enough to carry a kind of silence with him. We walked to the house again, every room. He didn't say much until we hit the back bedroom. "The place stinks like something still living," he muttered. There was a crawl space behind the closet. Looked like it had been added later, badly. The wall panel popped off with a crowbar. Inside, we found bedding. Not old. Fresh. Nestled into an alcove barely wide enough for a person to lie flat. A cracked mirror lay beside it, smeared with something like charcoal. Scratch marks on the inside of the wood. Little curls of nail and hair. And a notebook. The pages were filled with tight, compulsive writing. No names, no dates, just repeated phrases. "Don't move when he's near the walls. He eats sound, stay still." And one entry near the back that still sits with me. "Don't look at him, he's in the drywall." The sheriff closed the notebook slowly and muttered, "There's a reason they let some houses rot." He said it like it wasn't for my benefit, like it was for whoever might be listening. We sealed up the crawl space and left. I didn't file that footage with the county. I kept it on a flash drive buried in my glove box. But things got stranger after that. I started hearing shuffles in my own walls, just faint at first, like squirrels, but slower, intentional. One night, I heard breathing through the vent behind my bed, long, shallow pulls, like someone mimicking sleep. When I finally tore open the drywall 2 weeks later, there was nothing there, just dust and insulation. But I found something lodged behind a stud, a bootlace, tied tight, still damp. I haven't gone back to that house. I won't. Not because I'm scared of what's inside. I'm scared of where he isn't anymore. Story 5. The house that forgot. I left my grandmother had a house we weren't supposed to talk about. That's how she'd phrase it whenever the subject came up. Not a place to speak on. My mom called it a family burden, a sliver of land near the state line, deeded in some great uncle's name, locked in one of those Appalachian hollows where time never quite finishes its loop. In 2009, I found the address in a stack of probate documents after Grandma passed. No photos, no stories. Just coordinates and a key tied with brittle red string. I had no real reason to go, except that it bothered me how much they'd tried to erase it. The house sat at the end of an unmarked trail where the gravel turns to moss and the trees bend in like they're listening. The mailbox was rusted through. The road to it didn't appear on any GPS I had, and once I passed the last turnoff, it felt like I'd driven into something older than maps. The house itself was small, 2 stories, brown shingle siding, a porch that looked like it might fold in on itself if you stared too hard. What struck me was how still everything was. No birds, no wind, just that heavy quiet that sticks to your shirt. I spent one night there. That was all. I arrived mid-afternoon and left before sunrise. Nothing dramatic happened. No voices, no slamming doors. But I felt wrong. From the moment I crossed the threshold, it was like the walls leaned closer. I couldn't sit still. The wallpaper, yellowed floral patterns, seemed to twitch at the corners when I wasn't looking. I remember pacing, sitting on the porch just to get away from the air inside. That night, I couldn't sleep. I didn't even try. I sat in the hallway upstairs and listened to the floor settle around me, like something beneath the boards was rolling gently back and forth. At 5 a.m., I left. Just walked out, locked the door behind me, and didn't look back. It felt like slipping out of a dream you weren't supposed to wake from. A month later, I came home from work to find a plain manila envelope on my doorstep. No return address, no markings. Inside were 6 photographs. Each one of me, sleeping, sitting on that porch, reading a magazine I don't even remember bringing. In every picture, the background was unmistakable. The house, same windows, same sagging porch rail, same warped screen door. But I hadn't brought a camera. I hadn't seen another soul, and I'd only ever been there once. I stood on my apartment balcony for a long time after that, staring at the envelope like it might start moving. That night, I burned the photos in the kitchen sink. The smell wasn't quite paper, more like something damp and sour trying to remember how to be ash. The next morning, my bed was facing a wall that hadn't been there the day before. I live in a small 1-bedroom, and my bed's always facing the window. But that morning, it looked out over a wall of faded wallpaper, peeling floral pattern, yellowed, damp in the corners, just like the house. I touched it. It was warm, not sun-warmed, but body-warm, like it had breath trapped behind it. I backed out of the room, not taking my eyes off the print. I slept on the couch that night, and the next. Every time I checked, the wall was still there. Over the next week, little things changed. My shoes moved overnight. The faucet dripped a faint brown. The smell of old pine hung in the corners of my apartment, even though I lived on the 4th floor of a building surrounded by asphalt. At one point, I found dirt in my fingernails, even though I hadn't left the city in days. I brought friends over, casually at first. No one saw the wall the way I did. To them, it looked like regular drywall, blank, but I knew. I started pulling at the edges one night, tearing away strips like peeling bark. And beneath it, I swear to you, was the same water-stained wood I'd seen in that upstairs hallway, same knots in the grain, same dust. I stopped sleeping after that. Couldn't trust the dark. I started seeing flickers in reflections, me, but older, eyes darker, on the television screen when it was off, in the microwave door, once, in the reflection of a soup spoon, then One night, I heard footsteps upstairs. My apartment doesn't have an upstairs. I sat on the couch, breath held, every hair standing on end. They creaked from one end of the ceiling to the other, slow and deliberate, like someone pacing a hallway, like I used to do, that night in the house. I moved, packed my things, got a new place across town, brand new build, freshly painted walls, no history. I didn't take anything from the old apartment except my clothes. Still, the first morning in the new place, I woke up facing a wall I didn't remember falling asleep beside. Same pattern. Slightly different shade, peeling just at the corners. I don't tell people this anymore. I tried once, and they looked at me like I was grieving badly. Maybe I was. Maybe I still am. But every few nights, I hear something behind the wall. Not scratching, not footsteps. Breathing. And I keep wondering if I really left that house. Or if it followed me. Or worse, if it's still there, and what I'm living in now is just its way of holding on. Sometimes I think about going back, just to check if I'm still in the upstairs hallway, sitting where I left myself, waiting for the door to open again, and sometimes I dream that it does. Story 6. They kept the lights on. It was the last week of October when we took that trail out past Harlan. Me, Paul, and Cal. We'd done most of the ridgelines around there before, but this one was different. Thinner, less worn, barely more than deer tracks threading through poplar and beech. The kind of trail you don't find unless you're looking too long at the trees and forget what you're following. Paul said it used to be a mining access road way back, but I couldn't find it on any of the topo maps. No markers, no mileposts. Just a winding gut through the woods that felt like it didn't care if you ever came back out. By the time we realized how fast the light was dying, we were already too deep to turn back. The canopy caught most of what was left of the sun, and we hadn't seen flat ground in over an hour. Paul tried to act like it was no big deal. We'll find a place to crash. But even he looked sideways more than usual. Cal, always the quiet one, kept fiddling with his compass like the needle was stuck. That's when we saw it. Off to the right, down a sloping patch of root-warped ground, was a shape, big, house-sized, tilted just slightly, like the earth had started to shrug it off. A 2-story farmhouse, paint peeled away to the grey beneath, vines eating through the porch slats. No doors. Every window shattered, jagged glass still clinging like teeth. It shouldn't have looked welcoming, but somehow, it did. One room upstairs was lit. A soft, yellow glow spilled out from behind the torn curtain. Not like a flashlight or fire, more like an old bedside lamp. Steady, warm, too warm. We stood at the base of the slope for a long time. Paul finally said what we were all thinking. If there's a light, maybe someone's still living in it. But there's no power out here, I said. My voice came out thin, swallowed quickly by the woods. We should have left right then. Backtracked down the ridge and made camp in the trees, but it was getting cold fast, and the wind had that bite to it that sneaks into your bones. So we went up. The front steps groaned like someone whispering, "Don't." Inside was colder than it should have been, not just from the air, but in the way that old buildings get when they've been left too long, like the walls exhale frost. Dust swirled in thick pockets where our boots disturbed it, and broken glass crunched under every step. The house smelled of dry rot, rust, and something underneath. A sweetness that didn't belong, like apple cores left too long in the sun. There was nothing in the living room but an old, upright piano with no keys left, and a rocking chair turned toward the wall. We didn't touch it. I didn't speak much either. Just followed the glow up the stairs. The hallway was narrow, plaster crumbling, doors hanging loose on split hinges, but that one room at the far end still had light. We stepped in slowly. It was empty. Well, almost. A bare mattress sat on the floor, stained dark at the edges. No blankets, no furniture, just a single lamp in the corner, plugged into a socket that looked like it hadn't carried power since the Carter administration. The bulb inside it was smooth and glowing steady. I stared at it for what felt like forever, trying to figure out how. Paul knelt beside the wall and ran his hand along the baseboard. "No, wires running in," he said. "It's not even hot." I reached to turn the lamp off just to see, but Cal grabbed my wrist. "Don't," he said. His eyes didn't move from the window. That night, we bedded down in the living room, against our better judgment. We unrolled our bags on what was left of the floorboards. The house stayed cold, no matter how many layers I had on. I slept with my back to the wall and the flashlight in my hand. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to footsteps outside. Not animals, not wind. Shoes crunching glass. Slow, deliberate. Circling the house, there was something being dragged too, like a piece of metal or a pipe scraping the stone. I sat up, barely breathing. Cal was already awake, staring at the ceiling. Paul still slept, or pretended to. The light upstairs hadn't gone out, but now it flickered. Not like a bulb going bad, more like a signal, blinking. Long, short, long. Cal whispered, "It's calling to something." We didn't sleep the rest of the night. By first light, we were packed and halfway down the ridge. None of us spoke until we hit the first fire road near the trailhead. Only then did I glance back, curiosity getting the better of me. The house was gone. Not like we'd taken the wrong path. I know that slope. I remember the dead poplar beside it. But where the house had stood, there was nothing now. Just a scatter of foundation stones, moss-choked and crooked, like something old had been buried and the woods were just smoothing the surface again. We didn't talk about it on the ride back. Paul chain-smoked the whole way. Cal kept his eyes out the window. I tried to make sense of it in my head, rationalize it. Trick of the light. Exhaustion. Some squatters with a generator we didn't see. But that night, when I got home and laid down, I noticed something. Outside my window, across the road, there was a faint yellow glow coming from the upstairs of the abandoned house no one had lived in for 20 years. It blinked once, long, short, long, and then it stayed on. Story 7. A chair faced the wrong way. Most of the houses I get sent to are dead places. I do contract cleanouts for bank foreclosures. Go in, document what's left, haul out the junk, board up what needs it. 90% of the time it's just mold, roaches and the soft stink of bad plumbing. I don't scare easily, but I also don't mess around. If something feels off, I walk. Been doing this for 12 years. You learn to listen to the way a house breathes. This one was listed under an old coal line near Cumberland Gap. Had been sitting untouched since 1987, supposedly condemned and vacant, though the property record showed no photos past 91. The house sat back in the trees off a gravel pullout. Real basic structure, split level, 1.5 stories, aluminum siding gone dull with rust lines like dried blood from the roof seams. Nobody had been out to check it in decades. It was a cloudy Tuesday when I went out. The forecast said sun, but the hollow where this house sat held onto shadow like it didn't want to let go. I parked at the edge of the drive, overgrown with saplings, and followed the walkway, cracked, mossy, lined with pine needles. The porch groaned under my boots, but the door swung open with one solid push. No lock, no resistance. The air hit me like a hand to the chest, dry and cold, but with that odd smell I'll never forget. pine, cigarettes, and something underneath. Something like heat trapped too long in old clothes. The entryway was empty, kitchen stripped bare except for a ceramic ashtray still full. I moved through slowly, calling out just in case, but there was no answer, no wildlife, no drafts, just that heavy silence. I scanned room after room, flashlight sweeping over dust-thick carpets and water-stained drywall. Nothing had been touched in years, until I hit the back room. At first, it looked like the others. One window cracked. Baseboard heater busted, ceiling stained around the vent. But in the far corner, facing the wall, was a recliner. Not just furniture left behind, I mean placed, positioned. It was angled perfectly toward the back wall, too close, like someone wanted to see it, or maybe listen to it. And the chair wasn't dusty like the rest of the room. The fabric was worn smooth at the arms. The cushion held the shape of someone's weight. I reached out just to test it and felt warmth. Actual warmth. I froze. It's the strangest thing. My first instinct wasn't fear, it was embarrassing, like I'd walked in on someone, but the room was empty. My light circled the space again, still empty. I turned to leave. The hallway door I'd come through was half shut now. I didn't remember closing it. I reached for the knob. It didn't turn. Not stuck. Locked. From the outside. That's when I heard the chair creak. I didn't look. I couldn't. Every inch of me screamed not to. Instead, I stepped back from the door, slowly, pressing my shoulder against the wall. I felt breath on my neck, hot and uneven, like someone trying not to cough, right in my ear. I bolted, I tried the window, wouldn't budge. The glass was loose in its frame, but the wood around it had swelled with years of rain. I grabbed a floor lamp and slammed it against the pane. Nothing. The sound it made wasn't glass shattering, it was like hitting an old bone. I turned to face the room. The chair hadn't moved, but something was different. The space around it felt fuller, denser, like someone was sitting there, watching but didn't want to be seen. The breath came again, ragged, pulling in and stopping short. I think I blacked out. The next thing I remember is the sound of boots on the porch, muffled voices, flashlights cutting through the hallway. The backup crew I'd called that morning in case I needed help moving anything had finally shown. They found me sitting in the chair, facing the wall, eyes open. I didn't remember moving, didn't remember sitting. My flashlight was still in my hand, but the batteries were dead. I didn't say anything to them. Not then, not during the ride back. One of the guys, Jerry, said I looked pale and slicked over with sweat, like I'd been holding my breath for too long. When I got home that night, I showered 3 times, scrubbed under my fingernails until they bled, but I still smelled that room, that mix of pine sap and stale tobacco and something wet. Something is wrong. 2 weeks later, Jerry called me, said he'd gone back to finish the job, said the chair was gone, not moved, not taken, gone. He checked the house top to bottom, every room, even the crawl space under the kitchen, found one thing out of place, a worn-in dent in the center of the floor, facing the wall. I still work clean-outs, I still walk into stranger houses than that, but sometimes, when I'm alone, headlamp flickering, boots sinking into carpet that hasn't felt weight in decades, I catch myself looking for chairs, just to see which way they're facing, and I pray I never find another one turned to the wall. Story 8. The House Where Dogs Don't Bark. It's been 12 years now, and I still won't rent that place. I've let cabins rot before I'll list that one again. I own a small patch of land near the border of Tennessee and Virginia, old family property passed down from my grandfather who used to trap up there. Over time, I turned it into something useful, a string of hunting cabins, mostly for out-of-staters looking to bag their first buck or photograph the autumn colors. Most of them don't make it 2 nights before calling it off. Too remote, too dark, no signal. I never blamed them, but one guy, he came back different. Name was Calvin, mid-40s, wiry and polite. He drove down from Ohio with his golden retriever, Grady, and booked 3 nights at the easternmost cabin, Cabin 6. It's one of the older ones. Sits just past a ridge where the forest gets dense. I've cleaned it out enough to know it's structurally sound, even if the front steps creak like a coffin lid. Calvin checked in around noon, told me he planned to do a sunset hike with his camera, maybe run the dog up the trail. I gave him a map, pointed out the safe zones, and wished him luck. He drove off with Grady's head hanging out the passenger window, ears flapping. He was back before 9 p.m. I remember hearing the truck screech to a halt in the gravel lot. He didn't come inside, just sat there, hands on the wheel, eyes fixed forward. I walked out and tapped the window. When he rolled it down, I could smell the dog before I saw him. Grady was curled up in the back seat, trembling like a leaf. Didn't move, didn't bark, and that dog had barked at every squirrel in the trees when they first arrived. "You all right?" I asked. He just shook his head, slow, said one thing: "There's something wrong with that place." I didn't press, let him sleep in the truck. The next morning he was gone, didn't ask for a refund, didn't leave a note, just disappeared. Left his map in the seat pocket, with a circle drawn in red around the cabin and 2 words scratched beside it: no sound. I should have let it go, just written it off as nerves or bad luck. But I couldn't stop thinking about the look on his face, that pale, drained look, like someone who's seen a car wreck too slow to look away from, so I drove out. It was late afternoon when I reached the cabin. The light was that kind of yellow that feels like it's about to give up. The air should have been alive with late summer noise. Cicadas, birds, chipmunks in the brush. But the second I stepped out of the truck, I knew. Nothing. No hum, no breeze. Just silence. The trees didn't move. Even the leaves seemed to hold still, as if they were listening. Grady's behavior made sense now. I walked up to the porch and stopped cold. Lined along the railing, neat and spaced like someone had taken real care, were bowls, dozens of them. Metal, ceramic, plastic, some clean, some rusted, all filled with water, fresh water. I crouched to look closer. No debris, no bugs, no dust. The surface of each bowl was still, like glass. I remember thinking, someone's been keeping this up. But I hadn't been out here in weeks, and no one else was supposed to be. The cabin door was open, just a crack. I didn't want to go in. Every part of me said not to, but I had to see it, just enough to understand what Calvin had seen. I stepped over the threshold, the floorboards soft with damp. Inside was dim, but not dark. No furniture except a cot against the far wall. The air had that weird, hollow pressure to it, like standing in a room full of old radios, all turned off but humming anyway. It didn't smell like mold or rot. It smelled like wood smoke, but there was no stove. And then I saw them, not people, not animals, just shapes. Like the idea of someone. Faint impressions along the walls and in the corners. The air shimmered a little around them, the way heat does on pavement. They didn't move. But I knew they were looking. I didn't run. I backed out slowly, heart thudding in my ears. The only sound I could hear. Outside, the forest still held its breath. I turned toward the bowls. One was tipped over now. The water soaked into the porch wood like blood. I got in my truck and drove until the silence fell behind me. That night, I called Calvin. His number was still in the logbook. He picked up after 2 rings. Said nothing. I went out to the cabin, I said. I saw the bowls. Long pause. Then he said, "They feed on barking." I didn't understand. He kept going, voice low and cracked. "The noise, it draws them. Dogs are the only ones who sense them before it's too late. That's why they stay quiet. That's why it's so still. That's why there's bowls." Then he hung up. I've never heard from him again. I drove back out the next morning to board the place up, brought nails, a tarp, heavy-duty chains. But when I got there, the porch was clean. No bowls. Just dust and pine needles like nothing had ever been there. I never opened the door. I didn't need to. As I turned to leave, I heard it. A low whine from the tree line, not a dog. Something trying to be a dog. It stopped when I looked. I haven't gone back since. And I don't let dogs near that side of the ridge anymore. They know what we don't. That some places aren't quiet because they're empty. They're quiet because they're full.